Hi there, welcome back to our set of videos for beginning and basic keyboard skills. This is our 5th video. Hopefully you're learning a lot. Of course, you can always go back to those earlier videos and review the content and make sure you understand what we've been doing. So in our last video, we talked about scales. I'm suggesting the best way to work on your scales is to learn them going around the circle of fifths. So draw yourself a version of that and really learn that graphical image, the circle, and how you get from C and all the way back to C. And then, of course, you can play your scales chromatically. It's a more difficult way to do it, but you can do that after you've done your circle of fifths. Now, up till now, we've been talking about scales in just one octave. And so that's a great way to start. But now we have to start thinking about our scales in more than one octave. And so the next thing to do is think about first 2 octaves, and then we can just touch barely on 3 octaves. So a couple of things to think about when we do our scales in 2 octaves. So let's just use C major for an example. It's the exact same notes in the second octave. So we start with C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and it repeats C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now we have a longer way to go, and you'll notice that I stood where I would usually play 1 octave, but I was really out of position to play the second octave. So the first thing to think about, and I mentioned this in our first video about sight reading, is standing in the middle of the range of the piece. Our marimbas, and this is the 4.3 octave. Marimbas are now 5 octaves in length. You can barely touch the bottom and the top note, and so you have to decide where you're going to stand. If the range of your piece is here, then you stand here, and sometimes you have to take a step and move up here. If I'm going to play 2 octave scales, I want to stand right in the middle. So I put my left hand on the bottom note, right hand on the top note, and I just center myself. And then what I do is lean a little for the bottom. Here I'm in a perfect position. And lean a little to the top. Now that's preferable to this method. Starting, and a lot of people do this, they find the first note and they stand right in front of the first note. And now you have a problem, and now you have to take a step. And if you're going to go more, you're taking even another step. So I think you can manage easily a 2 octave scale by standing in the center and lean just a little bit. Your feet are shoulder width, your knees are relaxed and slightly bent. You shouldn't have any problem leaning that way and leaning back over that way. So we have to manage that range. The hardest thing about doing 2 octave scales is the fact that the sticking is backwards in the second octave. If I start the first octave with the left hand, the second octave starts with the right hand, and that's because, of course, there are 7 notes in our scale. Remember, ho, ho, half, ho, 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 half, 7 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we start again. So it's obviously going to start on the other hand. Now, that's not too hard to do in C major, so here I am, center of C major. Now let's go around the circle of fifths in our 2 octave scales. Our next one is G. So I'm going to move down here a little bit, find 2 octaves of G's, stand in the center, lean a little. Now my left hand struck the F sharp, remember that. But the right hand in the second octave strikes the F sharp. The sticking is backwards. Now, you can plan for that by doing your 1 octave scales, starting left, and then start right. So that's a great way to do that. But also, you have to be able to play at least 2 octaves, and the reality is you'll have to play 3 octaves. So the sticking is backwards in that second octave, and you have to manage where you're going to stand. Now let's go back to our arpeggios that I explained in one of the earlier videos. Remember, the arpeggio is the first, third, fifth, and repeating the octave note, and that gives us our major chord in that key. So back to C. The C major arpeggio, 1, 3, 5, C, E, G. So that was the 1 octave arpeggio, but now I have to handle the 2 octave arpeggio, and again, the sticking is backwards in the 2nd octave. Left, right, right, left. Arpeggios, I think, are much harder than scales. When we play the scale, you always strike the note right next to the one that you just struck. It's very easy to do, but the arpeggio, we are now starting to move quickly up and down the keyboard, and we have to pick particular notes to strike. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, you have to have excellent playing spot control. That's why it's one of my universal percussion principles. If you can't control your playing spot, then you can't play the marimba. And the reality is you can't get a good sound on your drum because you're not striking the spot that you want to strike. You always want to be very particular and knowing exactly where you're striking your drum. And in this case, I have to be very particular where I'm going to play the arpeggio. So I'm going to play 2 octave arpeggios around the circle of fifths. If you're doing this with me at home, we'll start nice and slow. Here we go. C major. Now remember my transition around the circle of fifths. Raise the 4th, move, because now I have to cover 2 octaves in G major. I know I can't go up to 2 octaves, and I'm going to D, so I need 2 octaves of D major. And you'll notice in D major, the 3rd of D is F sharp. I'm playing right on the edge of the F sharp, and we talked about that when we dealt with playing spots in, I think, the 2nd video. I have to play right on the edge. I'm not going to reach to the center right now. I'll be trying to go a little faster later on, and it's too far to reach. And besides, I really want to perfect playing at the edge of the bar. The next one is A major. So on, all the way back to the top of the circle. So you notice I was playing my 2 octave arpeggios using that transition of raising the 4th, which is the new accidental in the new key as you move around the circle. And that's how I get around the circle of fifths. So let's just briefly think about 3 octave scales. It's a long way to go, but you are going to be asked to play 3 octaves. So 3 octaves is right here, C to C. There's 3 octaves. I stood right in the center, and I was able to reach from here to here. That's about as far as I can go before I'll probably have to take a step, either slide my feet or maybe cross over or something like that. So you want to play your scales and your arpeggios up to 3 octaves. Start very slowly, be accurate, and little by little build up your tempo.